Listen up, pathetic mortals who hide behind their illuminated screens while pretending to accept themselves. Today we will dissect with the surgical precision of a psychoanalytic scalpel the greatest collective farce of modernity, the body positivity movement, and its selective hypocrisy that would make even the most creative neurotics in my office blush with shame. Prepare yourselves for a descent into the darkest abysses of the human psyche, where contradictions multiply like neuroses in a repressed mind, where false morality dances with the most primitive cruelty, in a macabre dance that will reveal the true face of this civilization that considers itself evolved. Body positivity, that waving flag of universal acceptance, preaches from the rooftops that all bodies are beautiful, that we should love our imperfections, celebrate our physical diversity as if we were children playing ring-a-ring in the garden of inclusivity. But wait, my dear involuntary analyzans, because when we apply the Freudian magnifying glass to this shiny facade of self-love, we discover a truth as disturbing as the repressed sexual fantasies of a Victorian society. There exists a cruel and unforgiving hierarchy even within this supposed paradise of acceptance, a social ladder of compassion, where some rungs are reserved only for the elect of the new progressive morality. Observe with me this fascinating and revolting phenomenon that unfolds daily on the bright screens of our electronic devices. Social media explodes with applause when a plus-size woman parades her self-esteem like a queen in her virtual palace, when someone displays their stretch marks as war trophies against the standards imposed by decades of aesthetic oppression, when scars are transformed into symbols of resistance against a society that insists on defining human worth through measurements and proportions. And rightly so, don't get me wrong, these people deserve all the respect and admiration for their courage in defying decades of mental conditioning. But herein lies the paradox that exposes human nature in its rawest and most hypocritical form, revealing layers of contradiction so profound they would make Dante revise his conception of the circles of hell. Because the very moment a man of average height, say 5 feet 5 inches, with a receding hairline that shines under the artificial lights of modernity like a beacon of relentless reality, dares to appear in a photo without a hat, without filters, without attempting to mask his physical reality with the available digital devices, the same society that preaches acceptance transforms into a pack of hyenas, hungry for the carnage of ridicule. Ah, but then body positivity doesn't count, does it? Then there's no point in celebrating diversity, authenticity, and the self-love we so champion when it comes to other social groups deemed worthy of protection. And here emerges one of the most fascinating characters in this grotesque comedy. The red flag woman, this paradoxical creature who embodies the entire contradiction of the movement in one person. She's the one who posts daily about body positivity, who shares inspiring quotes about accepting all bodies, who is deeply outraged when someone dares to comment on an influencer's weight. But this same woman, when on the dating app, automatically swipes left on any male profile that isn't at least 5 feet 7 inches tall, has a strategically receding hairline, or dares to exist outside the standards she herself should be fighting for in the name of universal inclusion. This red flag woman becomes the perfect symbol of the moral schizophrenia of our time. She defends tooth and nail the right of fat people to be loved and respected, but in the intimate moment of personal choice, when no one is looking, when she doesn't need to perform virtue for her followers, she reveals her most primitive prejudices. It's like watching an actress remove her mask in the dressing room after a moving performance about tolerance and universal love. This man, this human being who carries the same insecurities, the same existential fears, the same basic needs for acceptance and belonging as any other mortal walking this land of contradictions, immediately becomes the preferred target of collective cruelty, especially from those women who preach inclusion but practice selective exclusion. Jokes about compensation spring up like mushrooms after a rain. Comments about a Napoleon complex echo through virtual corridors. Speculation about the need for big cars to mask imaginary disabilities spread like highly contagious mental viruses. The very discourse that should protect him turns against him like a snake biting its own tail, creating a vicious cycle of hypocrisy that feeds on its own contradiction. But let's go deeper, much deeper, because the surface of this hypocrisy is only the first layer of a psychological perversion far more complex than our conscious mind can initially process. What's really happening here is a phenomenon I'd call collective blame displacement, a social defense mechanism where humanity, unable to confront its own inadequacies and prejudices rooted in centuries of cultural conditioning, chooses convenient scapegoats to vent all its accumulated frustration. And the short, bald man has become the perfect sacrifice on the altar of false progressive morality, offered especially at the hands of these red flag women who make hypocrisy an art form. Analyze with me the language used, the words chosen, the tone employed when different groups are attacked, especially on the social media of these women who consider themselves defenders of body diversity. When a fat person is ridiculed on social media, dozens of advocates immediately emerge talking about body shaming, the profound psychological damage of fat phobia, and the urgent need to create safe spaces where these people can exist without fear of society's cruel judgment. Campaigns are organized, influencers take a stand, brands withdraw support from those who practice this type of discrimination, and an entire social protection system is activated like a collective immune system. But when a short man is called a short, a hobbit, Tyrion Lannister, or any other degrading nickname that reduces his humanity to a physical characteristic, these same red flag women are often the first to laugh, to like the comment, to add their own cruel jokes. Where are the influencers taking a stand against discrimination? They disappeared like ghosts in the wind, evaporated like the intellectual honesty of a society that feeds voraciously on its own contradictions. The red flag woman develops an impressive capacity for mental compartmentalization. She can post an inspiring photo about accepting her own body in the morning, and in the afternoon, be in a group of friends making jokes about the shorty guy at the office who tried to strike up a conversation with her. It's a cognitive dissociation so perfect that it would deserve an in-depth study in any behavioral psychology textbook. She has become an expert at applying her principles of acceptance selectively, like buggy software that works perfectly for certain functions but fails miserably at others. The stark truth, stripped of all the rhetorical trappings of political correctness, is that body positivity has become an exclusive club with entry criteria as rigid as the beauty standards it supposedly so fervently combats, and red flag women are the club's most rigorous gatekeepers. There's an invisible but absolutely real hierarchy, a caste system disguised as inclusion, where certain physical characteristics are deemed worthy of protection and others are seen as free territory for human cruelty to manifest itself in all its primitive glory. It's as if there were a secret list, an unwritten manual that determines who can be ridiculed without consequences and who must be protected at all costs. And these women are the most zealous guardians of this discriminatory list. And don't think for a second that this is coincidence or simply collective carelessness. No, my dear specimens of a species in constant contradiction with itself, this is pure psychological strategy, a mechanism as old as human civilization itself. The collective mind needs targets to vent its accumulated frustration, and red flag women have found in the short, bald man the perfect target to project all their own insecurities about attractiveness and social value. They know that attacking other protected groups would result in social cancellation, so they channel all their pent-up cruelty toward the only group it is still socially acceptable to ridicule. The short, bald man becomes the perfect repository for all collective insecurities, especially those of red flag women who need to feel superior to someone to maintain their own precarious self-esteem. He represents everything these women fear in their partners: inadequacy to social standards, the possibility of being judged for being with someone considered inferior by the social group. Attacking him becomes a desperate way to distance herself from these terrifying possibilities, to signal to other women that she has standards, that she won't settle for less than what is socially approved. But consider the cruel irony of this theater of psychological horrors that unfolds daily in our endless feeds, especially in the profiles of these red flag women, who present themselves as champions of inclusivity. The same movement that should fundamentally question why height and hair density are considered legitimate markers of human worth simply accepts these prejudices as immutable givens of nature. It's as if to say, yes, it's absolutely terrible to judge people by their physical appearance. It's a primitive behavior that we must eradicate from our civilized society, except when it comes to short, bald men, because then everyone instinctively knows. They're inherently inferior, and I have every right to have preferences, don't I? The red flag woman has developed a sophisticated rhetoric to justify her hypocrisy. When confronted about her exclusionary standards, she quickly invokes the argument of personal preference, as if preferences were natural phenomena that arise in a vacuum, completely disconnected from the social conditioning she herself should be questioning. It's a stunning intellectual maneuver, advocating the deconstruction of aesthetic standards for everyone else, while maintaining her own standards untouched and unquestioned. This surgical selectivity reveals something far more sinister about human nature than we'd like to admit. It shows that our capacity for empathy and acceptance is not universal, as we proudly proclaim, but rather conditioned by prejudices so deep that we don't even recognize them as prejudices when we look at ourselves in the mirror of conscience. Red flag women are particularly adept at masking these prejudices behind progressive language, creating an additional layer of hypocrisy that makes it even harder to confront the reality of their discriminatory behavior. And here we come to the radioactive crux of the matter. Body positivity isn't really about universal acceptance, as its red flag advocates proclaim. It's about power. It's about social control. It's about arbitrarily deciding who deserves protection from human cruelty and who can be sacrificed on the altar of collective entertainment. Red flag women have become the curators of this selective cruelty, determining with surgical precision which bodies deserve celebration and which can be ridiculed without social consequences. Because think about it. If we truly believed that all bodies are worthy of unconditional respect, why do these women who lead the body-positive discourse still maintain lists of unacceptable physical characteristics on their dating apps? Why is it still socially acceptable for a body-positive influencer to make jokes about men's height? Why do shows hosted by women who champion body diversity continue to use short men as comic relief without any of these advocates raising their voices in protest? The answer is simple and brutal, because the moral evolution of these red flag women is selective and self-serving, guided not by universal principles of justice and compassion, but by social calculations, peer pressure, and ideological expediency that benefit only their own insecurities and needs for validation. They protect only those groups with which they identify or which can provide them with social capital, while completely ignoring the pain and humiliation of groups that offer no political or social benefits to their public image. The short, bald man fights alone against centuries of prejudice, while the red flag women who should be on his side in the fight against oppressive aesthetic standards are often among his chief tormentors. These women have created a perverse system where they can feel virtuous defending certain groups while perpetrating cruelty against others, thus maintaining a sense of moral superiority without truly needing to examine their own deepest prejudices. The red flag woman thus becomes the perfect symbol of the hypocrisy of the body-positive movement. She represents all the contradictions, all the blind spots, all the fundamental flaws of a movement that promised universal liberation but delivered only a new form of exclusion, more sophisticated and morally disguised than the previous one. This phenomenon also reveals how these women build their own self-esteem at the expense of the dignity of other vulnerable groups. They desperately need to maintain some targets for ridicule, some groups that can be attacked without social consequences, because this allows them to maintain the illusion of superiority that fuels their own narcissism disguised as progressivism. And don't be fooled into thinking this only affects men who fall into this specific category. This fundamental hypocrisy of red flag women corrodes the entire fabric of the body-positive movement, transforming it into a cruel farce that promises inclusion but delivers exclusion in disguise. Other women are beginning to realize that the movement isn't really about universal principles, but about political and tribal expediency, creating a distrust that undermines the cause's credibility. The uncomfortable truth is that we live in a society where red flag women have turned compassion into a personal commodity, treating acceptance as a marketing product to build their own personal brands of virtue. They sell inclusion like influencers sell products, with carefully selected target audiences and strategically defined exclusion groups. Body positivity in the hands of these red flag women has become a trademark with strict copyrights governing who can and cannot be accepted into the celebrated diversity club. It's a self-image business disguised as a social movement, a personal public relations firm specializing in managing one's own reputation as a virtuous and morally superior person. And the most pathetic thing is that many of these red flag women are the ones who talk the most about acceptance, the ones who post the most about diversity, the ones who are most outraged when they see discrimination against groups they consider worthy of protection. But these same women are often the first to laugh at jokes about short men, share cruel memes about male pattern baldness, and perpetuate the very prejudices they claim to fight. It's like watching someone preach about animal rights while wearing a fur coat. This contradiction isn't just common hypocrisy, it's a symptom of profound mental dissociation, an astonishing ability to maintain contradictory beliefs in separate mental compartments without ever allowing them to meet. Red flag women have developed this skill to an artistic level, managing to be genuinely outraged by discrimination against some groups while practicing cruel discrimination against others. Because ultimately, what we are witnessing is not a genuine movement of universal acceptance led by people of integrity, but rather an elaborate performance theater where red flag women stage virtue while perpetuating the same systems of exclusion that have always existed, only with new criteria and justifications more palatable to the modern consciousness. And while this grotesque charade continues to unfold, real men with real feelings, with legitimate needs for acceptance and self-love, are left behind as perfectly acceptable collateral damage in the construction of these women's public image as champions of inclusivity. Their psychological trauma is systematically ignored by the same women who make careers advocating for the mental health of other groups. Their tears are considered fodder for further ridicule. Their humanity is denied in the name of a distorted feminism that thrives on selective male humiliation. The cruelty directed by these red flag women toward short, bald men manifests itself in particularly sophisticated and psychologically devastating ways. It's not just direct romantic rejection, but an entire culture of humiliation and diminishment that these women help perpetuate through their comments, their laughter, and their conscious choices to treat these men as less worthy of basic consideration. When a short, bald man finally finds the courage to approach one of these red flag women, he faces not only personal rejection, but also an entire system of public humiliation that she helped build and maintain. She may even politely decline, but immediately afterward, she'll tell her friends about the shorty who had the audacity to take an interest in her, turning her vulnerability into social entertainment. The body positive movement, in the hands of these women, has become a prison with selective cells, where some prisoners receive VIP treatment, while others are left to rot in oblivion. It's a just cause completely corrupted by the personal hypocrisy of its supposed champions. So when you see the next red flag woman posting about body positivity, when she shares the next inspirational quote about accepting all bodies, when she's outraged by discrimination against groups she deems worthy of protection, stop for a second and take a look. Where are short, bald men on your list of bodies worthy of celebration? Why are they still the only ones excluded from your inclusivity party? The answer you find will reveal not only the individual hypocrisy of these women, but the entire systemic rot of a movement that has sold itself to self-serving marketing and abandoned its fundamental principles. Because deep down, these red flag women know exactly what they're doing, building their own reputation as virtuous people at the expense of the dignity of men who can't defend themselves, who have no organized movement, who offer no social benefits. to those who defend them. This is the stark reality of body positivity led by red flag women, a movement that promised universal freedom but delivered only a new form of selective oppression, where the oppressed themselves became the oppressors, where the victims of aesthetic standards became the perpetuators of other, equally cruel standards. And until we confront this hypocrisy head-on, we will continue to be complicit in a cruelty that would shame anyone with a modicum of moral coherence. So, there's the final truth these red flag women don't want to hear. They've become exactly what they claim to fight. They're the new patrollers of aesthetic standards, the curators of socially acceptable cruelty, the ones responsible for keeping the flame of physical discrimination alive, while pretending to be defenders of body diversity. Want more truths these red flag women don't want you to know? This channel doesn't romanticize. It's pure psychoanalysis, unfiltered, without hypocrisy, without the social makeup that hides the true face of female nature. If you have the stomach for the raw reality of these contradictions, if you can bear to see hypocrisy mercilessly exposed, subscribe and prepare to have your illusions about feminine morality completely shattered. Because here we don't sell comfort to wounded egos, we sell painful but necessary awareness. And awareness, my dears, always hurts before it definitively heals.